And thank you, everybody, for coming. There's quite the turnout. So thank you. Thanks a lot. We're going to approve our last minutes, and then I'm going to describe a little bit the code process that we've done. Is there a motion on the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Good. Okay. And Deborah's our fifth member. She's joining us on that. Some of you know, but some don't, that we are the Shelter Island Board of Ethics. I'm Ralph Wilson. I'm a retired investigative reporter. My wife talked me into applying for this position about a year ago. And because it's kind of in my sweet spot of investigating things and determining standards or finding standards that may apply to people that I investigate or look at. And I also chaired a Seattle Times ethics group decades ago that wrote the newspaper's first ethics code that was supported and accepted by management and the union. And so that was successful. So I have, and I've had personal ethics codes apply to me through my journalism career, which no longer do, which is the reason why I can do something for government. And I volunteered for this position, as did every other member up here. And it's, I can introduce you all briefly, or you can.
Up to you.
I have a little introduction. It's a dream team of ethics experts. Deborah on the screen is an expert in bioethics and is the co-chair of the Visiting Nurse Service of New York Hospice Ethics Committee. Deals a lot in ethics. Bob Raber actually taught ethics at the Dental College at Columbia University for 20 years until recently. Is also an expert in medical and obviously dental experts. Ethics. Laura Cunningham is an attorney, a recently retired law professor, and she chaired the Academic Standards Committee at the Cardozo School of Law. So she was looking at student ethics. That's a ripe area, as well as other work at the law school. And Shelby Mundy was born here, and she knows she's the accounts official here at Town Hall, so she knows all about budgets and spending and is a tremendous help to us all. So that's the five of us, if Deborah was here, that have volunteered and been appointed by the town board to advise them on ethics. You might know Christine and Stephen have also done, in my view, a wonderful job for us in this last year. We started, we are just an advisory group, right? So we've been working for a year to develop a better code of ethics for town employees. And we're almost done, we hope, with insight, and then it goes to the town board for public hearing and action. And we're hoping that that can be this spring, but the timing is up to if we make more significant changes, and then the town board as well. So it could be as soon as April, May, or it could be later, but it's completely up to the town board. Why we need an ethics code is because, well, we have one, but it fails to account for many provisions of the state law. So it's basically, it's a two-page document that y'all might have at the back table there, which ignores a lot of the state law requirements for municipal ethics codes. It also doesn't have any enforcement provision or any provision for complaints by people against town employees. It only provides for employees to ask for an ethics opinion on themselves, which we would confidentially research, and then they can hold the findings confidential to themselves. So it's a confidential employee advisory service that misses a lot of the, requirements or the standards for modern ethics codes for towns or all sorts of other codes. And the town board recognized that. You might recall about a year ago, there was various ethics charges in the air. And the town board wanted to reconstitute the committee, which had been inactive. And they have. And they wanted us to recommend improvements through the ethics code. And that's what we spent a lot of the last year on. Now, this code applies to employees and officials who are full-time and part-time and unpaid advisory committee members. So it's a fairly broad reach. You don't have to be paid. We're not paid. The other advisory committees aren't paid. It applies to them. They're considered town employees under state law. Let's see. Why now? We did an annual report recently, a couple months ago, for the activity that we did in 2022, and it should be back there too. And it basically says, it complains about the vagueness of the current ethics code and the lack of teeth in it. It also talks about during 2022, despite that, we received 6 inquiries from employees that we responded to after investigation. And 3 of those cases, we asked the employees to do something different, and the other 3, we didn't. We said they were fine, their plans, their activities were fine. So, but all that's secret, and that's the problem with this, is it can't guide other employees. That's one of the main purposes of an ethics code, I think, is to guide other people and keep them out of trouble, as well as to, make clear lines so that ethical officials are protected from false or spurious accusations. And none of that is possible with such a secretive process. There's also no complaint process under the current code. So that's kind of my overview, and then I'm just going to run down a few highlights in the actual code. I guess, let me ask if any other members want to help with this overview. Want to jump in for what we're doing and why for...
Are you requesting?
Yes.
Well, I'll start. If you pick up the code that we have now and look at the preamble, it talks in section 801, prohibits conflict of interest and conflicts between the town and one of its employees. This is something that I don't think was in the previous code. It was, many things that we put in here that were just overlooked in the previous code, and also the previous code didn't define things very well. So one of the things we did in section 8.2 is definitions, and most importantly, definition of a financial benefit. So it's not always money; it can be services, loan, travel, entertainment, those sort of things.
Yeah, but I'm going to go down.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're stepping on my...
I thought you just wanted a break. I thought you wanted a break from talking.
That's the next thing I'm going to do.
Oh, okay.
Okay. But
Anyways,
it defines ethics as conflicts of interest, primarily financial conflicts of interest, so that there's some bright lines on, instead of just ethics, which can be a pretty squishy term. You want to add anything about?
I hadn't come afraid to. Step on your toes.
I'm going to go down the sections, the main sections.
Okay, I will say a couple of things. First of all, and Bob mentioned section 801. There is a New York statute. It's called Article 18 of the General Municipal Law. It deals with employee ethics or municipal employee ethics. And it's not a great statute. It's widely criticized, but it seems to not be in the mood to change. And it's true that our current code didn't deal with a lot of those things. The center of all of these codes has to do with conflicts of interest. And what that essentially means is that when the interests of the employee may be in conflict with the interests of the town, that person has a conflict of interest. And those can come up in any number of circumstances, and an employee may well be worried that they may be in a conflict of interest situation, and then that's where this code tries to flesh out the situations in which that may occur. And then there's a bunch of other things that are prohibited that are largely picked up from the state, Article 18, the state code.
Right. Most of this is from Article 18. It's a state law that has not been in our.
Much of it is, yeah.
And then it can be like stricter than the article here on Shelter Island, but not laxer. And we've tried to strike a balance because it's a small island to not be unreasonably strict, but where we can, to recognize people need to work on the island. They might have multiple roles and so forth. So there's things certainly that aren't in here that are in some other codes, especially in larger towns, such as annual financial disclosure. We don't have that. What we do have is situational financial disclosure. And we already have that on Shelter Island, this for land use applications. I don't know if anyone knows this, but land use applications to the zoning board and the other ones, the applicant has to disclose if an officer or employee of the town or their family has an interest in the application, which can be an indirect interest. So land use applications, they actually do properly under state law here on Shelter Island. Contracts and legislative acts, they don't. One of the first things that's in the code is in section 8-5, where if an employee has an interest in legislation, personal financial interest or his family, legislation or a discretionary act, like issuing a discretionary permit, they're supposed to disclose that and then to recuse from considering that, let's say if they're on an advisory board or they're in a position, and to let other people handle that. So it's one of the major new things that's in our code and state law that we haven't done previously, an interest in legislation or discretionary acts. They can solve that by disclosing and recusing that interest. Then
I'll give the example of the lawn, leaf blower.
yeah.
So the example that Steve always gives is that if our town supervisor, if the town board were about to look into a law regulating leaf blowers, so that we'd have to go to electric leaf blowers, since the town supervisor has a business that might be affected by such a legislation, he would have to recuse himself from any discussion. He couldn't be in the room. These are the things that we put in the code. Not only could he recuse himself, but he would have to step out of the room. So that's a perfect example of legislation and conflict.
Yeah, and he's talked about this. He would, if that comes up, he has a financial interest in the outcome, he's got to disclose it and recuse himself. Fairly straightforward. Now, if section 8.8 says employees and their spouses aren't supposed to acquire new investments that pose a conflict of interest once they start working for the town. And if they have a conflict of interest investment before they come to work for the town, they don't have to give it up. They might have to do things to, avoid the conflict, like disclosure and recusal, but they don't have to give it up. They're not supposed to get any new investments that pose a conflict. Again, I think pretty sure that's state law. 8.13 is if an employee or spouse has a financial interest in a town contract or spending that can be influenced by that employee, the money, the employee needs to disclose that, and they can't do that. There's no out for that. They have to disclose it. Recusal does not cure a prohibited interest in a contract or town spending. So to use the Jerry Siller example again, it's a stretch because I don't think the town's considering buying a bunch of leaf blowers. If they were, I don't think they could buy them from his company. So the money is regulated a little tighter under state law and this proposed code than other things, as it should be. We'll come back. We're going to open this up to your comment. I know you're all like, what? Give these looks. But and would love to hear your comments and questions, but I think it's best just to run down the gamut first. Moonlighting, there's restrictions on moonlighting if a second job conflicts with the first job an employee has. I think that's in the current code too, and it's in this one, and in state law. There's a cooling off period for future employment. This proposes that someone who leaves the town employment can't do certain things, and details are in section 8-10. Some town laws around here like this, like Southampton, I think, 3-year cooling off period. We have a 1-year cooling off period, basically, which is the shortest that we saw. Meaning, what would be an example? If you've worked, I guess, if you've been a building inspector, for instance, for a year after leaving the town, you're not supposed to help clients with the building department to get permits. That's a pretty clear example, that sort of thing. It's cooling off so there's not a conflicting interest or the appearance of problem, right, in that first year.
I'll just piggyback on that and give an example. If I leave, I wouldn't be able to present an application in front of the zoning board for a year. So that's another example.
Right, that's another example. Someone like you or maybe others that have more responsibility would have more restrictions kind of on what you can do in the cooling off period. Yep. It's a common thing in federal and state ethics laws, I think. So it's in the, then.
Can I just clarify one thing? One thing that it runs throughout here is a lot of these restrictions, they mainly apply to situations in which the employees has to exercise discretion. So one example, if you're applying for a beach permit, right, the town clerk doesn't exercise discretion and saying, no, I'm not going to have one or not. They just, rubber stamp it. Where in contrast with that, if you deal with somebody who wants you give me an example, because I'm not.
Area variance.
An area variance, something where there's a judgment involved by the employee. That's what we mean when we say exercise on matters that require an exercise of discretion.
Right. Right, and that's the case in the section about the legislation and other matters requiring discretion. So I guess big picture, we don't really have an effective code at all now, just a confidential employee advisory service. This would set some guidelines that are actually in state law for the most part, and then some kind of a review procedure if there's complaints.
And if I could just chime in on that. It's, as you say, it's like an informal advisory opinion process. So there's no enforcement authority. So they can give advice to not do X, and then an employee can still do X, and it's of no moment. So that's why this needed to be bolstered to give some teeth to.
Yeah, because we can, and we have, given opinions to people and they can ignore them or not. Under the new system, there would be a public disclosure of our opinions that found that there was a cause that someone had run afoul of the code, because we would send our recommendation or report to the town board, and they could choose to act on it whatever measures are available to them. So that's the public disclosure part of it. It leaves the authority with the town board ultimately, but certainly by airing these out, it would help not only, I think, to keep everything clean, but to advise other employees.
But they're redacted, so you don't, there's no names involved, correct?
No, the ones that are found to
Oh, okay.
are not redacted. If there's ones that aren't found or the confidential ones, they're all redacted still.
Did want to chime, and when we go back into working over the draft, I did want to chime in.
Okay, maybe that's not clear, yeah.
Because it just, yeah, we can go into it in more detail after you get done.
Yeah, it's still a draft. We're interested in hearing from you all, and we're going to talk about it some more at the end of this meeting too. Okay?
Yep.
Any questions? Yes.
A few things.
Great.
First,
Let me move this, spittling on.
good idea.
The young mother.
I want to thank everyone, and I want to thank Stephen in particular, because I know he did a lot of work on the actual codification. What existed previously was grossly insignificant, insufficient. And I think that this is a great step. And I have a few additional suggestions.
Great.
By the way, my name is Bill Mastro.
Thank you.
Not everyone knows me. And I did a lot of this during my life. So I don't come from this just as a nascent thing that has just happened today. First, I kind of make a recommendation to everyone, if you haven't already, take a look at the New York State Controller's Office. They do reports on examination, and they've examined a number of towns. And they found a lot of things that we didn't even come close to. So that would be a good thing to take a look at.
So, yeah, I'm sorry, you're saying they review other municipalities' ethics
like
codes?
Colonnade and Huntington and places like that. There's a lot of reports of examination on their website.
That's actually, a lot of this is based on the controller's model code and.
Right, I've noticed. So, but the reports of examination get a little bit more practical in terms of the process and procedures that have occurred within the towns. And a few suggestions that go more towards process and procedure. Because basically, ethics in this kind of context is conflict of interest over and above everything else. I think it would be a good idea to codify that the town is required to develop a conflict of interest policy and a standard of conduct document. Basic little ones that could be distributed to everyone. That periodically, all town employees complete a conflict of interest questionnaire. And that in addition to completing it, and they probably have different ones for different levels of employees, for those on advisory boards, et cetera, that they do an attestation. And they should attest that the answers are true, correct, and complete, that they have read, understood, and are in compliance with the conflict of interest policy and the standard of conduct, and that there are changes that happen subsequent to doing all of this, that they will immediately inform whoever is the right person within that. And then finally, I think it would be a good idea, and I know some codes have it, to have like a training requirement, an educational requirement, so that materials should be available to employees as well as those who conduct the business with the town. So those are a few quick suggestions. Stephen knows where to get me. You can ask me. I mean, I had compliance and all these other departments report to me all through my career, so I got some of this.
Great, all those are spot on suggestions, thank you. Please.
Hello, I'm Bob Cohn. Not an expert in this field, but I'm an attorney, so read it with an attorney's eyes. First, congratulations are in order for an excellent job. I think this is far better than what we've had, and actually did a very good job of covering a lot of things that we covered.
Thanks.
The most important thing in my mind that was added to this proposed code that you have here is that in the prior code, or the existing code, the Board of Ethics could only act upon the town board requesting it to act. And it says on written request of the town board, it's what you would do advisory opinions.
Yeah.
And your proposal now lets any resident to submit a complaint about an ethics violation or proposed or alleged violation.
Yeah.
And it allows you as a board to, on your own initiative, to initiate something on your own without having someone in the town board, ask, or the town board itself as a body asking for it. I think those are the two most important changes that you have in here procedurally. Substantively, I also think your recognition that this is a small town and there are just not many people around here to do certain jobs that need to be done is very important. So a lot of things that can be, a lot of ethics problems or conflicts problems can be solved by full disclosure as opposed to pure recusal or even worse, your misdemeanor and things like that. So you have to use your own judgment based upon the circumstances. It's not New York City. This is Shelter Island. There's only so many of these volunteer jobs to go around. For that, it's a matter of discretion. There are certain things that are going to be difficult that you can't put in a code that's going to have to come to the board. For example, you raised the issue of you called it the Jerry Stiller issue, the landscaper perhaps, who's like a town supervisor or such. And if you're talking about leaf blowers, that's a pretty obvious question. Suppose there's a proposal to increase fees on all contractors who work in the town, whether it's landscapers or otherwise. Raising fees might not necessarily seem like a legislative conflict potential. But on the other hand, when you do raise fees on the businessmen who might come to the island, you may create a conflict because it excludes lower cost players from coming to the island to open businesses here. And that's something you're going to have to deal with. But the fact that you have a resident can make a complaint or you can do it on your own allows you to explore those issues as they come up, which I think is great. Also, I think that there is a drafting problem. I was just going to mention it to the town attorney, but I think you might take a look. This just came up to me as I was sitting here. In section 8.9, it does say no officer or employee during their tenure may engage in any private employment or other services, et cetera. You look at C, involves any matter before the town board or committee in which they are a member, to which they have the power to appoint any member, et cetera. It's what's going to come up. They might have private employment or they may do work for somebody, and then something can come up in the process. That would make them an automatic violation of this, the way it's drafted. So what you want to say here, and I think Stephen can deal with it, that unless provisions are, this code is otherwise, like if there's recusal, unless there's a recusal or a required disclosure or anything required by this code of ethics, then a violation would occur. You wouldn't want to put someone in automatic violation just because some issue came up while they were on the town board. It's just a drafting issue. It's not a big deal. In terms of Mr. Mastro's suggestion of layering, I think what he suggested earlier about attestations, other things that would have to be instituted as a matter of course for the town employees, I would recommend that you reject that particular recommendation, because I think it increases, it adds a layer of bureaucracy in a small town that I don't think is necessary, and it might increase the town's costs. You may have to hire an administrator to deal with issues like that, not that particular one, but you take them and add them up, you're going to find increased town costs, and with increased town costs, you got increased property taxes. So you got to be really careful about layering in bureaucracy. That's going to be sort of overkill when you have something as robust as what you've done here in a Board of Ethics that I think is competent to deal with the issues that come up. Thanks.
So hold on.
Sure.
One thing occurred to me as you were talking. What if they raise fees on all contractors, for instance? And we don't want to deal in hypothetical cases when we get cases, but I think when we're drafting a code, it's important to think about hypotheticals. And I think that there's kind of an exception for things that affect everybody on the island
Yeah.
or a large group of,
I think it's.
That may
should
be-
An automatic exception. I don't think there's anything you need to change in the code here to
Yeah, yeah.
deal with that particular problem.
yeah, it's not
I would
automatic.
suggest that, for example, if the town supervisor, for example, instituted an increase in fees across the board, it could be just simply all landscapers, then there's going to be more of an obvious problem.
Right.
But it could be all contractors. You might have building contractors on the town board who would like to eliminate competition
Yeah.
because, and they may find a way to do
Right here.
that by increasing fees.
Yeah.
I can't predict whether that would be a problem or not.
Yeah, it depends on
The
circumstances.
fact that you have a provision in here that allows a resident or on your own initiative
Yeah.
to bring up the potential issue,
Yeah.
then at least it's disclosed.
Yeah.
Well, we have an exception to that in 8-7, but maybe we should look at the language more carefully to make sure it covers your concern.
Yeah,
Yeah, all right.
it's a good question to raise.
Yeah,
Take a
so I
look
don't know
at
the
it.
answer, but
Yeah,
it's
let's,
just,
it's a balancing act on some of these things that we've.
right. It's just that you can't always predict these hidden conflicts that may come up where there's an insidious intent in changing the legislation or changing the code,
Right.
which are not obvious on the surface.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, David.
Guess we're standing. First, let me say thank you, because this is otherwise a thankless job, and so I applaud all of you, including Deborah. Hi, Deborah. For taking this on. So I'm David Hoffman. I live at 40 South Midway, and I've been on the island for only 32 years. I consider myself maybe a half a step above a visitor. But I do have some strong opinions about these matters. Let me, before I ask a couple of questions, share that I have some other interests that you and my neighbors here ought to be aware of. I don't consider them conflicts of interest, and that's kind of the point. But I do work with Deborah on the ethics committee of the BNS Hospice, and like Bob, I've been teaching ethics at Columbia for 28 years. And like Laura, I used to teach at Cardozo Law School. Just, it's a small world. The ethics world, that is, and Shelter Island, obviously. So my concern is this religion about the phrase conflicts of interest. And so I have two questions, one macro and one micro, about whether you thought about thinking beyond the notion of conflicts of interest and broaden your sort of concern or purview to divided loyalty and competing interests. Because conflict of interest is a pretty high bar. And so I wonder if you gave any thought to other kinds of interests and loyalties and divided affiliations that ought to be disclosed and maybe ought to give rise to some sort of action as an ethical matter, not even so much as a legal matter under the general municipal law. So that's my macro question. My micro question is 8-6, the recusal provision. And I'm wondering if you gave any thought to whether the code ought to even touch on matters of enforcement. So what, for example, would you have the ethical norm for Shelter Island, which I consider to answer to a much higher ethical standard than anywhere else? What should be the approach to resolving an individual thinking that they don't have a conflict of interest, even if they have some divided loyalty because they serve on a church board or something, and someone else thinks that there is a conflict of interest or a divided loyalty? Do you see that as part of your job? And then I will make one editorial comment in addition to my two questions. My editorial comment is, you ought to, I think, say something in the code about what the public's right to understand your work is. Because if going forward, the work of the Board of Ethics of the town of Shelter Island is strictly advisory and strictly contained within the government body, then we should know that. If there's a process by which recommendations you make are examined and corrective actions are taken, and then somebody checks to make sure that the corrective actions actually worked, and the public ought to know about that, then you should say that as well. In healthcare, we have a mantra for quality assurance: find it, fix it, check it. And I wonder if there's a place for that set of values in our code of ethics.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I'd like to just answer that one. In this proposed ethics code, the Ethics Board is going to provide an annual report to the town supervisor and the town board on what they've been doing over the year. And then also it's proposed right now to publish the advisory opinions and also final decisions on complaints. So that is the act that'll get out there for the public dissemination. We got to talk about, again, how much information is going to be released in that. And I think we're going to talk about that after the public comment section. But yeah, so we have some of that in there.
Yeah, exactly. So to be clear on that, this has been raised by others. The current draft has, if someone is found to have violated one of these ethics provisions from an outside complaint, that can become public because we send it to the town board in some form. Now, if they're found that there's not cause they violated or a confidential employee advisory request, that's not public, right?
I think I have to review that part.
Well, no, I think you're going to publish, well, as it's drafted now, you're publishing everything. Certain things are going to be redacted, and others are not. Like the advisory opinions, you're going to provide in summary form, just so it could be a guide for other employees to utilize. And also, so it gives the public information as to bounds of, employee interactions or whatever.
This is published advisory opinions in summary form that removes personal identifying information. That's what you're referring to.
Yeah, correct. So it's redacted summary.
Well, it's in summary form even, because it'd have to be so redacted so that it doesn't identify the person
Correct.
indirectly.
Yeah, so I don't know if you, because I wanted to just try, I think it'd be pertinent now, if I may, just raise this issue. My concern with publishing, because right now it's written, it's published its final decisions on complaints and referrals in which it finds there was a violation and recommendations to the town board for disciplinary actions. So that's what publishing that. There's no redaction in it. And when you make a decision that a code provision was violated, it's based on probable cause. So I didn't know, and that's just a reasonable basis that a violation may have occurred. I think there should be some protections of the person who's the subject of that complaint when it's only a probable cause standard. And, so we've got to talk about that as far as the publication of that.
I was just going to answer the point about penalties. We had in section, 821, we had decided, we looked at other penalties. There were other towns in similar size on the South Fork, North Fork. They did have penalties built into the ethics code. We decided that we didn't want to put actual penalties in there. We referred to the town board to decide what kind of penalties. But the most important thing is, as you pointed out, that in the past, we could render a decision and nothing could happen. Now, this new code will be a different ballgame.
And we do have to talk about, that was another issue I wanted to bring up with you. So again, we can either talk about it now or after.
Yeah.
But I think Deb has her hand up.
Oh,
Thank you for seeing that. Yeah, I was wondering if David could drill down or explain, unless the two attorneys do understand what he's talking about already, on competing interest and dividing affiliations as distinct from conflict of interest, because they're just words to me. I don't know the nuance of those three terms.
Yeah, so the two phrases I suggest maybe ought to be part of the conversation are divided loyalty and competing interests. And what they are simply is something, the words, in the words of the sage philosopher George Carlin, who said there are no bad words, only bad thoughts, bad intentions. And words mean what we decide that they mean. And Deborah, to your question, the notion of divided loyalty or competing interests, and you can phrase this any way you want, is to say that it's something other than a conflict, right? So there are times when someone's current employment or prior employment ought to be something known to the public so that they can judge the legitimacy or the sort of shadowing or coloring of their opinions based on their life experience. And so that might be something that in a code of ethics, you want to say things that are short of an agreed upon conflict of interest ought nonetheless to be disclosed. One of the prior speakers talked about a disclosure form. Many organizations use an annual disclosure form. The questions on them tend to be very simple and broad. I use one for my clients that has 5 questions, and it casts a big net so that everyone has the chance to put on paper that which anyone else might be interested in knowing about, not to determine whether there's a conflict of interest, but just to know where your perspectives come from. And so that, Deborah, was my thought.
So divided loyalty and competing interests is a lesser conflict than conflict of
Yeah,
interest.
that's what I was gonna-
Lack of a better term.
Conflict
But
necessarily
it doesn't
of-
rise to a conflict, but it's a little
Right.
something that.
Yeah.
It is something that might lead people to ask, is this a conflict of interest? But unless those lesser kinds of prior relationships or other loyalties are disclosed, all you get is somebody thinks that something is or is not a conflict of interest. And if they think it isn't, the rest of us might never learn of it.
So raises an eyebrow.
Yeah, and our
It
thinking on,
opens up a discussion.
Thank you, David.
our thinking on that to date is, we consider these annual disclosure forms that are required by cities of 50,000 or more in New York, and thought, I don't want that on Shelter Island because it's a form, it could be short or long, but an employee has to fill it out every year. What questions you ask, that can be short or long, and I have a lot of experience with those forms, with covering them. Instead, our system is transactional disclosure that we've come up with, of disclosure if someone has a financial interest in legislation, a discretionary act, a contract, or spending.
I think we were trying to make it more objective rather than subjective. And what you're describing feels quite subjective.
By its nature, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's the hard part.
Good issue to raise. Thank you,
It's like
Dave.
you're a professor or something.
Hey, I hired him.
Old dog new tricks.
Didn't either.
Hi, Benjamin Diet. I skimmed through this. One thing.
He's a lawyer, by the way.
I'm a lawyer. I have a non-practicing lawyer, and I haven't taught ethics in any law school. But one thing that did jump out at me is that seems very based in the financial side of conflicts, and what David was, I think, pointing to was non-financial conflicts. And for instance, I sit on the board of Sylvester Manor. And if I also sat on the board of the zoning commission, if there was an issue that would come up in front of the zoning board that related to the manor, is it a financial conflict? No, but it certainly is a divided loyalty. And I couldn't really see how that got addressed.
It's really good. Actually, one of our cases that we looked at in the last year evolved into what's called a two hats case. A person that's wearing two hats. There's not necessarily a financial conflict like that, but it's something that we kind of struggled with, I think. It'd be nice to have clearer rules, but difficult to do.
Well, your example is a good one and helpful to think about.
Hard to write rules. There's a lot of case law on two hats situations, but it's not in ethics codes that I see in municipalities. It's just common law, case law. So what do we do with that?
And that's what we were going back and forth, right, with the definition of interest versus financial benefit or whatever, and that substantial benefit or material benefit verbiage.
Yeah.
So I think that's why, like, in other codes, they have it, and in the state definition, material benefit is something that's so amorphous that it could potentially capture something like that. So maybe we'll talk about revisiting.
Yeah.
For the record, naturally, I would recuse myself.
Okay. Thank you. Good ideas here. Questions?
If Zoom audience.
What?
Stephen
audience.
Jacobs.
You want to
But yes,
Stephen Jacobs.
Hi, one hopefully easy drafting suggestion and a broader suggestion. The drafting suggestion is to make clearer in the definition of officer or employee that this applies to members of a board or committee. And that could easily be done by just saying, including any member of a board or committee. And that would actually mirror the portion of the general municipal law that this definition is taken from, which specifically says including members of any administrative board. My broader suggestion is, I know there is a provision which I think is useful for the public to be able to make an ethics complaint that the board has to address. It occurred to me perhaps there should also be a provision that would allow the public the opportunity to seek an advisory opinion and give the board the opportunity, but not the obligation to respond in a substantive way. And the reason I suggest that is that that type of procedure might have the effect of avoiding problems before they actually arise, and also being able to do it in a less adversarial manner. Thank you.
Interesting idea. Thanks. Yes,
I can have
I have a second word, yeah.
very brief. In terms of a disclosure, I can understand why you maybe not want a full questionnaire, but questionnaires are the best practice. No ifs, ands, or buts about that. Anywhere in the corporate world, you're going to find that, and in most of government, you're going to find it. It doesn't have to be extensive, and it doesn't have to be overly bureaucratic. What it does is it gives the opportunity to identify disclosure early.
Yeah.
And by doing that, you can often avoid problems later on down the road.
Yeah.
Now, if even after all of that, you say, no, we don't want that. We don't want to go with even a 5-question type of situation. I would still suggest, and I know one of the not-for-profits I deal with does this, have everybody at least attest that they read the conflict of interest policy and the standard of conduct.
Right.
And that in that, if there is something, they do have to come forward to disclose. Just another suggestion.
That's a good idea too. Hold on a second. So, because we did consider this in the early months of our work, if there was just like a short questionnaire, what would it include? It would include what property do you own or your family members? What businesses do you have, right?
Doesn't even have to go that deep.
But
I
those
mean,
are the-
I have and I can share, I have all different types from different types of companies that I've been associated with. And you don't have to get crazy in terms of that. You just want to give the opportunity so that if there's something out there that someone could say doesn't pass the smell test, it's disclosed. It doesn't mean that something that Bob kind of was discussing, disclosure is more important than recusal. Because off of disclosure, you can make a decision, going back to your piece, of whether it's material, whether it's not material. There are even things that occur in New York State where New York State has in their law that certain types of people are on certain types of corporations where you would say that's a conflict. It's a conflict that's considered and disclosed. So I would hesitate to put handcuffs on something that would lead to good disclosure, because disclosure kind of protects everybody.
Would you be able to send us different?
I'll talk.
Okay.
Yeah, I have from different places.
Great.
I'll talk to you offline.
All right.
On that.
Interesting, thanks.
Yes.
I have a form that I drafted that's 5 questions, yes or no.
I like that.
Okay,
And
what's the,
then if you want to invite people to offer details in response to a yes response, you can, but you don't have to.
okay, thanks.
And usually when there's a yes, there's something, you usually give a little bit of an explanation.
If you want to make that the requirement, you
No,
can.
but usually most people want to if they're given a yes.
Do you have a business that does business with the town?
Yeah, right.
Or does your family?
And when you do that, you also want to include, immediate family.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's a whole pathway that we veered away from that I guess we could revisit, right? Yeah. Because we want to get it as right as we can. It's not going to be perfect. Please.
Some of these things can be a trap for the unwary, it can cause some problems. Yes and no questionnaire, probably not, but I haven't seen the questions. But if you ask for somebody, I'm trying to think of an example while I was sitting there. I'm like a music copyright attorney, and someone mentioned George Carlin, so I did the George Carlin estate. So I become a town board member. I didn't disclose that at the time, because how in the world would that possibly become a conflict? And all of a sudden, you want to put 7 dirty words at the school or something like that, and there's a controversy, and I didn't disclose that I happened to work for the George Carlin estate. Am I going to look like someone who didn't disclose something?
You disclose then, you didn't disclose originally on your.
Original, because I would never have thought.
Right, but if it comes up, you can disclose at that
So
time.
but I could be criticized later on for not having disclosed something, and it's going to embarrass people in town. It can be used to cancel people, it's used to. And it also sounds a little intrusive from a privacy perspective as to what you really want me to disclose in terms of various things that I can't think of. So you got to be careful about adding layers of bureaucracy that may cost more money and get people in trouble for no reason at all. And that's what happens today.
Yes, because where I'm from, when people ran for office, they had to disclose a bunch of stuff. Now we have 2 people running for office here. How much do you have to disclose when you file for a town board?
Not much, right? No one would run if we had to.
Really? How about in the?
Where are you from?
You're running for federal office, you got these huge, all
But
these
not
disclosure
state or local offices at all?
Still got through.
Because it's the people that have, the public would have the most interest in their disclosures, I think.
But you're talking about someone joining an advisory committee, like the Water Advisory Committee, and then they got to fill out a questionnaire about potential. Some of these are obvious. The guy may run a marina, and be on the Water Advisory Committee, so it's disclosed.
I realized there was so little disclosure out here in New York.
That may be a good thing. It's one of the things people like Elder Island about, is that, we all know each other anyway.
We know each other.
would like to disclose that I have not been convicted of a felony.
I failed to disclose that Duff and I like to drink beer together.
No, but seriously.
Yeah.
I signed
Can you come up here just so?
a code of ethics. You have read this code of ethics, sign this every time I'm employed. I work in the film industry, so once every 3 months I sign this.
Right.
And also a non-disclosure and sexual harassment. I mean, it's pretty standard in the world now. And usually the accountant administers that. You have to get, an ethics code. So you've read the ethics code. So we know you've read it. So you also have steps to know that you can't do this, which I think is great. It'll stop people from, violating code, getting themselves in trouble. And also, a disclosure agreement. Are you family doing business? It's standard these days. So I don't think it's unreasonable, and I think it would be a way for people to not get in trouble.
Yeah,
I think that'd be great.
if they attest that they've read it.
Yeah, you just have to read it. You don't have to say that.
Do that.
Yeah, do some of that. What else do you do?
Yeah, with the employee handbook, right?
Yeah.
You have to sign off that you read it
When you
and.
joined this committee, you needed to sign something, and I think it says in there that you read the ethics code now.
No, it says that you read employee handbook and
Okay.
ethics code is addendum to the employee handbook.
Okay, so you
That's
do
interesting.
sign.
Yeah, yes.
Everyone who joins a committee or.
Yeah, so you don't have to do a separate and distinct one. We
Right.
can make it
It's
part and
already there.
parcel of the manual, and we'll update it with the new code.
With the new code.
And I also think, Duff, didn't you discuss having like a watered down version of the ethics code, like a employee,
Plain English guide.
plain English guide?
Yeah,
Yeah, so.
which is under development. But Bill, I think that you had a further suggestion that they not only attest that they've read it, but that they do or don't have any situations that might be applied.
I'll reference one of the not-for-profits that I've worked with.
Can I just, before you get in, can people, when they get up, just state them, just so we have the
Oh,
record?
Bill Mastro again.
Yeah, you saw me come.
Okay, sorry about that. And probably the simplest one, there is a separate conflict of interest policy, a separate standard of conduct policy. And that's distributed, and people must, just sign off that they have read and that they are not in conflict with anything within this, and that they have followed it. If we're not looking to impose undue burden on people, but partly, as I said before, you want to give the opportunity, if there's something out there that will not pass the smell test, that it is disclosed. That's all. And sometimes disclosure is sufficient. You don't need to do much more than just disclose.
Yeah, get ahead of it. Bill. Thank you.
Yeah, I also think, training is very important, but if you could have, you sign and attest to something and read, like, how do we know the person read it enough?
I didn't leave.
So training, I think is more important, than like annual training.
I didn't really leave. That's why in the beginning I mentioned it would be good to have an educational piece, and that the educational piece would be not only for the people who are working or serving on volunteers boards, and it shouldn't be overly extensive, but also for people who are doing business with the town, so they know some of the rules. For instance, I saw in here you had a gift up to $75. A lot of places have, the various different de minimis amounts. Would be nice. I'm a businessman. I want to take you out to lunch. I know I can do this. I can't do that. To have a little bit of educational material that way.
It's a state law, the $75, by the way.
Yeah.
And if the-
No, I know that.
If the businessman's intent is to influence your decision, there's not a de minimis.
No, the state has been 75 for a long, long time.
So-
Corporations have different de minimis
Okay.
amounts.
You're going to send us some of those examples of,
Short question is, 5, 6 questions.
okay, good. Anybody else? Okay, well, thanks so much, everybody, and we're going to work on this some more.
Yeah, and just so you know, as Duff said in the beginning, we're trying to get this in front of the town board at a work session, hopefully next month, work sessions. And then once it gets in front of the town board, they get to sink their teeth into it. And we'll be scheduling it for a public hearing. So we'd love for all of you to come back at the public hearing part and also hopefully we address the concerns raised, or some of them.
Would you please, since a lot of us read this and took the time, if you make changes to it, maybe the attorney can do a red line copy for people so we can see what the changes are.
Yeah, for sure, we're gonna make some changes.
Yeah, but Duff's good at, we have techno issues. So, yeah, Duff will make sure that,
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
thanks everybody for coming.
Work?
Hmm?
Are you continuing to work?
Yeah, we've got another hour.
Here. Nice to see you, David. I recognized you, but you had to talk for a while for me to remember you.
Thanks for.
Make a motion to go into executive session. Discuss some
To what?
straight.
Oh, it's a motion to close the public input? Yeah, that's right.
Would you want links to a couple of those?
Related to Brian Men's.
Like Brian and, oh, yes, that's, so that's my husband, Mundy. He's Mike and Rebecca Mundy's son, if you know them. I do. So Mike and Jerry, his dad, are siblings.
Susan was. Back here for like
I'm gonna,
years.
Oh, really?
And I haven't heard from her or maybe she's not with me.
Yeah.
Any contact information, she wouldn't mind me sharing.
Oh,
Shelby,
Our first puppy named Susie after TV.
and move. We go into executive session to talk about personnel matter, and an employee's employment. And, which.
I second it.
All in favor? Aye.
I just.
I'm gonna move that we invite Deborah as a guest.
Yes.
Into this session. That takes a motion. I don't think it does take a motion, but we'll
You could
just invite her.
yes, correct. You can invite anybody you wanted to.
We're out of
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
favor? Aye.